Now that we've got our CSS applied to the page and starting to get things to look like our mockup, we need to figure out why all of this content isn't quite showing up right. We've got the colors applied, and links and stuff are starting to look appropriate, but it's not really lining up on the page correctly. What we need to do is start making changes to the HTML so that our HTML output by Drupal matches what is expected by our CSS. For example, if we take a look at the CSS files for our theme, sites, all, themes, 960 robots. If I open up this main.css file, and I start to scroll down through it and find the portion of this that is defining the layout of our page, you can see here it's addressing things like the div with an ID of content wrapper, or something with the ID of header, and header main, and so forth, and positioning those things on the page. If we look at this markup output by our theme currently, I can search for something like content-wrapper, and it's not actually anywhere in that markup. So our CSS isn't being applied to anything on this page. So what I want to do is start getting the HTML of this page to conform to what our CSS expects. There's two ways that we could do this. One of them would be to copy Drupal's default page.tpl.php file into our theme and start making changes to the HTML that's output by Drupal in order to add our CSS class names and our HTML markup structure. The other method that we can use, and what we're going to do in this chapter, is actually copy the HTML file provided by our designer into our theme, use the HTML from that file, and start replacing static portions of this file with the dynamic output from Drupal. So I'm just going to take this index.html file. I'm going to grab this images too while I'm here, and copy that from the mockup provided by our designer into our themes directory. Sites, all, themes, 960 robots. I'm just going to paste in all of those images because we'll make use of those. And then this index.html file, which contains the HTML for our page and all of the appropriate class names and IDs. In order for Drupal to start using this HTML, what I'm going to do is make a copy of this index.html file. So I'll just duplicate it, and I'm going to rename the file to page.tpl.php. The page template file is responsible for providing the wrapping markup of our entire page. Things like the div that wraps the entire page and each of the different regions on the page, like our sidebars and our footer and so forth, are going to be inside of this page template file. So I went ahead and declared it, made a new page template file by copying index.html and renaming it. If I switch back over to my site, I need to clear the cache so that Drupal picks up that new template file. I'm going to say clear caches. Once it's done that, I can close the overlay and back to our theme, and look at that! It looks like we pretty much finished everything. Actually, you'll notice what's happened here is that the things that used to be dynamic on the page before that our Drupal site was printing out for us are now replaced with just the static HTML that was in our design comp. None of this is actually dynamic content output by Drupal. What we need to do now is figure out how to replace these static portions of the page with the dynamic content provided by Drupal. In order to do that, we need to start editing our page.tpl.php file. So I'm going to open that file up inside of my editor and take a look at what's there. If we were to take a look at the source code for our site right now, you would see this HTML here that's provided by the page.tpl.php file is exactly what is on the source code of our site, with a couple of exceptions. Let's take a look at that real quick. So I switch back over. If I look at the source code, one of the things that you'll notice is that things like the doc type here and this opening HTML tag are actually being printed out to the page twice. This HTML tag is not the one that was provided by our page.tpl.php file. But if I scroll down a little bit further, you'll actually see right here is the one that was provided by our template file. The reason for this is that this header portion of the page that includes printing out the style sheets the HTML opening and closing HTML tag, and your opening and closing body tag are actually provided by the html.tpl.php file, not by the page template file. So it's a little bit confused right now in that our page template file contains those things. So what we can do is actually just switch over to our page template file and remove these top lines, which are the doc type, the opening HTML tag, anything in the header, and the body tag. I'll remove those. I also can scroll down to the very bottom of this file and remove the opening and closing, or the closing body tag and closing HTML tag. Again, these are all provided by Drupal's default html.tpl.php file, which we'll take a look at in a second. Once I save that, now Drupal will be printing out the head tag, the HTML tag, all of our style sheets, just like we want it to, and not doubling it up by adding them a second time inside of our page template file. The other thing that we're going to need to do is start to replace some of this hard-coded text inside of our template file with dynamic variables from Drupal. Things like the name of our site, 960 robots, making Drupal look good. If you switch over to the site right now, you'll see that's what's printed on the page, but that's not actually the name of our site. In order to start this process, one of the things that I usually do is take a look at Drupal's default page template file as a reference for what variables are available to be printed out inside of my theme's page template file. You can find the default page template file by navigating to the modules directory in Drupal core. Inside of system, or the system module, there's the page.tpl.php. This is the default page template file that's used whenever a theme doesn't provide its own page template file. I'll open this one up, also inside of my editor, so I can get a look at how Drupal does it by default and how I might be able to deal with it inside of my theme. I actually find this reference to be really useful because up at the top here you can see they've documented all of the different variables, or at least the most commonly used ones, that are used in a page template file and what each of those contains. I can see, for example, some general utility variables like is the user currently logged in, are they viewing the front page, and so forth. I can also start to take a look at some of the page content variables like the title of the page, the messages that are displayed on the page, and additional things. I find the best way to use a lot of these things is to scroll down and find how Drupal core is using them. So for example, I might want to print out the title of the page or our site name. What I might do is come and say, okay, this is how Drupal core is doing it inside of its page.tpl.php file. And if I look at my page template file, right here, this h1 is the name for our site, so I might want to replace that. So I can go ahead and, in this case, find the corresponding lines in the systems page template file. I'm just going to copy and paste those. And I'm going to copy it right over the top of our h1 here, with remembering though that this one has an ID of logo text. I'll paste that in. I noticed that the one that I pasted in has an ID of site name. I'll go ahead and change that to what it used to be, which was logo text, and click save. And now when I switch back over to our site and look at and refresh the page, you should see the site name is actually the name of our site as provided by Drupal, not what was previously hard-coded into our template file. This works because the site name variable in our template file contains the value that we entered into the configuration form in Drupal, and we went ahead and printed it out here by copying and pasting from the page template file provided by Drupal core and copying that into our own page template file. There's some additional things that we may want to do that we're going to want to replace as well. For example, we've got the slogan here, making Drupal look good. But I might want that to be the slogan that's provided by my theme. If I switch over to the page template file provided by Drupal core and take a look at the list of all the variables that are provided for the page template file, I'll notice that one of them is this $site slogan. It says, this is the slogan of the site, empty when display has been disabled in theme settings. I'm going to say, okay, that sounds like what I might want. Site slogan. So if I switch back to my template file here, where I have this hard-coded slogan in the template file, I'm going to delete that, and I'm actually going to open a new PHP statement and print out the variable site slogan, and then close the PHP. If I save that, switch back over to our site and hit refresh, I expect to see this "Making Drupal Look Good" replaced with our site slogan, which in this case is going to be empty because we haven't actually set a slogan for our site. Just to confirm that this actually works, I'm going to go ahead and set a slogan so we can see it in action. I can do so by going to Configuration, Site Information, and setting the site slogan here. We'll just say, "This theme is awesome." Save configuration. When I close the overlay and the page is refreshed, I should see our site slogan printed out on the page now. There you go, just as anticipated. In order to continue building our theme, we just need to keep repeating this process of replacing the static content in our template file with dynamic variables. Let's take a look at a few more of them. Back in our template file, you can see here we've got our navigation across the top. These are those tabs that are displayed at the top of the page. They're in a div with an ID of nav and an unordered list with the links inside of it. Drupal outputs its main menu and secondary menu as an unordered list that contains a bunch of links as well. So we can simply replace this unordered list here with the links output by Drupal's menu system. Once again, the easiest way to do this will be to find the relevant bit in the page template file provided by Drupal core, where it's printing out the main menu, and just copy and paste that into our page template file. So I'll switch over here, and I can see it says a couple things in this page template file. First is checking to see if the variable $main menu is true, then do this. I'm going to copy this line here, number 106, which contains this print theme links and is printing out the main menu. I'll copy the entire line and switch back over to our theme. And then I will delete the existing hard-coded content in our page template file. I'll paste what I copied from the system template file here. And I'm also going to add a couple of additional lines of code. You noticed in the page template file provided by Drupal core, there was that if main menu, like so. And then the corresponding closing tag, which is just this end if here. What this is doing is saying, check the feature main menu to see if that has been enabled by the theme. So if someone went and checked the checkbox to enable the main menu, I want to display it. That's what's happening here, is it's actually displaying it. It's using print and then a theme function. We'll talk more in depth about theme functions later on, to print out this main menu variable which contains all of the links. This theme function is basically taking that list of links and rendering it into an unordered list and printing it out on the page. If I switch back over to our theme or to our site and click refresh, I expect to see this hard-coded list of menu items replaced with the ones that we set earlier. This looks like it's mostly working, except for the fact that it's printing out this text main menu here. Let's take a look at our template file and see if we can get rid of that. If I switch back over to our template file and take a look at where we printed out that main menu by copying from our system page template file and using this theme function, if I look at the code here, I notice that one of the things that's being passed to this theme function as an argument is the text main menu. For now, in order to remove it, I'm actually just going to delete that portion of this array and save. Later on in this series, we'll get much more in depth into theme functions and how they work and the different arguments that are provided to each one. For now, I just want to get our menu links to print out without the heading of main menu. If I switch back to our site and click refresh, there we go. Now it's really starting to look like our site. Up at the top, we've got the main menu actually being printed out. And I can click on one of these, like the About Us, and go to the About Us page. Sort of. When I go to the About Us page, you'll notice that the contents of the page is actually still the content that's in our page template file. I need to replace this content with Drupal's actual content for the node that is the About Us page. Once again, I'll switch over to our template files and take a look at how to do that. In this case, what I need to do is print out the region of the page that contains the main content. If I look at our template file with the static content inside of it, I can see here This is sort of that main content area. It starts with this div with an ID of main here and goes all the way down to where it closes down here. What I'd like to do is actually replace all of this with Drupal's page content. So I'm going to do that by first taking all of this static HTML here and just deleting it. So I've deleted the static content and I need to replace it with something dynamic. But what do I replace it with? In this case, we need to look at the page array provided to the page.tpl.php file and the contents of that array. For reference, it helps to look at the documentation in the system template file again. You'll notice here under regions and page, it shows that each of the different regions on our page are contained within this page array, content being one of them. So I've got $page content that I can print out on the page. You'll also see down here in the template file, this is how the Drupal core template file does that. It says print render $page and then the key of content. I'm going to just copy that and move over to my template file and paste that in. Now when I click save and refresh on our page, we should start to see the content of the page show up as well. Yeah, there we go. This is the actual body content of that node, or the About Us page on our site. Once again though, we're sort of taking one step forward and two steps back. Now we're missing the title that was on the page before, and some additional things. Again, we can continue that process of copying and pasting all of the different pieces that are necessary in order to allow Drupal to output all of the dynamic portions of the page. In this case, instead of just copying this render page content, I would probably actually copy all of the things here inside of this content div and paste those. Real quick so that we know what's going on here, here's what each of these different things are. The first one up at the top, if page highlighted, print out this div and then render page highlighted. What this is doing is saying if there's a region named highlighted and it has content, print out this div. My theme doesn't even have a region named highlighted, so I'll just delete that. The next couple lines here we can see is printing out the title of the page. This title is like the title of the node when you're viewing a node, or when you're on the front page, this is the title of your site. Or if you were viewing a view on your site, this might be the title that was created for that view. In addition to printing out the title, it's also printing out this title prefix and title suffix. The title prefix and title suffix here are used to allow modules to insert additional content before and after the title of the page. This is especially important for modules like the RDF module, which needs to be able to output additional semantic markup for your template files. After it prints out the title, we've got the tabs variable here. These are those action tabs at the top of every node. The tab that allows you to click and say edit and so forth. We've got the help being printed out here, print render page help. We've got action links. In this case, the action links are when you're viewing the front page of your site, for example, all of the links that show up in the little gear to the right of a node that you can click on the gear and say edit this link. That's part of this action links here. And we've got the actual page content. And then we've also got any feed icons. So if your page has an RSS feed, the links and icons for that would show up inside of this feed icons variable. And switch over here to our site and hit refresh. And you can see all of those things in action. It's now printing the title of the page. I can click edit to edit this node. If I go back and view the front page of our site, you'll notice that it's now printing out the actual content of our site. And you can see over on the right here, the gear icon and those action links are getting printed out as well. There's a couple of additional things that I can copy and paste out of the system page template file in order to get this one fully operational. If I switch over and look at the system page template file, the things that I'm going to look at here are the messages variable and the breadcrumb. Our design calls for breadcrumbs. So we want to make sure and print those out. And then $messages contains any of those warning or help messages that Drupal prints out to the page. When you edit a node, for example, it prints out at the top of the page, this node has been edited. When you get an error, it prints out the errors at the top of the page. Those are all inside of this messages variable. And then breadcrumbs are obviously the breadcrumb trail across the top of the page. I can bring those over. I want to make sure that what I copy and pasted before out of the system template file matches the HTML that is in my mockup template file. So I can see that the div for the breadcrumb, ID breadcrumb, and breadcrumb, this one, however, has a class of grid16. So I want to make sure and apply that. So I'll do that. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and just delete this hard-coded line. So now I've got our breadcrumb and our messages. Switch over to our page template file from Drupal core again. If I take a look at this, there's some additional things that we may or may not use in our theme. Our theme doesn't have this logo capacity at the moment, so we don't need to worry about that. As I scroll down to the bottom of the page, it looks to me like we've gotten all of the important variables out of this page template file. Things like the messages variable are really important to remember. Tabs is important to remember, because without that, you won't be able to click on the edit link to edit a page. There's some additional ones here that address the regions for the page, like sidebar first and sidebar second. We're going to talk about regions in another chapter, so I'm not going to worry about those at the moment. One more quick scan through here, and it looks good to me. Switch over to look at our page template file, again, the one that we created. All of the variables that we put in here, breadcrumb, messages, and so forth. And the things that are still hard-coded here are like the search form and these blocks that are at the bottom of the page. These are all things that we need to create new regions for first before we can actually start replacing these static pieces with dynamic content. We'll talk about doing that in the next chapter. The process that we took in order to create this template file is one of two possible ways that we could have done it. We started with an index.html file that contained all of our static HTML, and we went through and started replacing static portions of the page with dynamic variables provided by Drupal. Things like printing out the messages here, for example. We could have done it the other way around. Instead of starting with the static HTML and replacing the content with variables provided by Drupal, we could have started using a copy of Drupal's page template file by copying and pasting from the system module into our theme, this page.tpl.php file, and then adjusting the HTML and markup in this file to match what we needed. Both methods work. It really depends on which one's easiest for you and how your theme and design is provided to you in the first place.